As far back as humans have existed, stories have always been told. It could be simple stories about hunters going out and getting a bunch of animals. It could be more complex stories. And as humanity has evolved, stories have always been there. They've always been a thing that people tell, they pass down from generation to generation. They write books of telling these stories. It's just a part of humanity. And so when I look at today, I look at all the different types of stories that I made. There's movies, TV shows, books, poetry, video games, all sorts of stuff. However, I want to focus on that last part. Video games. I believe that whenever you look at what has the most potential to have the greatest stories, it's video games. I really do believe that when you just not even just looking at the history and stuff, which there has been a good history of great stories, but I want to look at the potential of why video games truly can be the greatest form of storytelling. But before I continue, I mean, if you feel like it, like and subscribe, share the video if you want, just support the channel however you can, and I greatly appreciate all of it. Now, back to the video. Now, I want to focus on one specific thing: perspective. So let's say you're watching a movie. You're watching this from the third person perspective. You're watching this as an outsider, watching these other people. Let's take a book then. You can either do first or third person perspective, and you're seeing other people doing stuff. That's the main thing. You're watching other people do stuff. This is like choose your own adventure stories where like it's talking about you specifically doing it. But that's not really very common. And plus, you can only do what the writer actually writes out. That's why video games, I believe, are much better at all of this. You are physically controlling the character. Yes, there's a storyline that you're following, and your characters do certain things when you get to cutscenes, but for the most part, a lot of it is you controlling the character, doing whatever you want. Especially in the case of an open world game where you have like a large area to explore all to yourself, you can do whatever you want. You can go down the journey however you want, do side quests, all that sort of stuff. And with a movie or a TV show or a book, all of that, you have a main story that you go down and you follow it all the way through, which I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm saying that it's a certain type of storytelling that can always be limited. And video games are limited too, don't get me wrong. But I feel like what really sets it over the edge is that you are physically there. On top of that, let's take a movie. They're usually around like 90 minutes to 2 hours. Maybe they're even 3 hours or 4 hours. Let's take a TV show. You can get a really long show that has 24 episodes in each season, have like 8 seasons. That's a long time sitting with all these characters. And then let's take a book. I mean, books can take either like 10 minutes to read or 100 hours to read. But let's take a video game. Now, that's more similar with the TV show's length, but the thing about that, about a video game, is that a lot of it is just you can do whatever you want. Let's take, I'm going to use this example later, so let's take Red Dead Redemption 2, where the story takes a long time to complete. But there's endless side quests, different things you can do, an open world that you can explore. There's so much that you can do, and all of it is with the main character, Arthur Morgan. You are always there by his side, controlling him, doing whatever you want with him. And that's the part of the journey that makes it so much more special, is that you're really with the main character for a very long period of time. Or GTA 5, where you're with these three main characters, controlling them whenever you want and just doing all this stuff with this really epic scaled journey that you go on. There is this deepest psychological feeling of like, when you're with these people for as long as you are, you kind of like feel like you know them as a person, especially if it's really well written. That's the thing. This all relies on the fact that this is really well written, but not a lot of games have good writing, but I'm just taking the examples of what it can be best at. And when you have a really well written video game, you can really be with these characters and feel like you're with them the entire way through. And that's also why when sad things happen, they can be really depressing. I'm not going to spoil the ending of Red Dead 2. I mean, most people by this point have played the game, but if you haven't played it, then I won't spoil it for you. But I'll say this, by the ending, that is one of the most like depressing, like saddest scenes I've ever watched. And it's because you're with these characters for hundreds of hours and you get to know them so very well. And so seeing how sad it is another reason why it makes you feel like these are people that you're watching, like these are people that you actually know. When in actuality, they're just characters, they're fake people. Some of the reason why movies and TV shows and books can always move us so much is because you feel like these are real people actually going through this. Another one of my favorite video games I've ever played is it's a little game, probably not a lot of people know about this, called Before Your Eyes. And the whole point of that game is that your character is going through this trip. Another one of my favorite video games I've ever played is a game that probably not a lot of people know, and it's Before Your Eyes. So the whole plot behind that, because it really only takes like an hour and a half to play, like maybe 2 hours. It's really a short game. And the whole plot behind it is that you're in the afterlife and you're basically seeing your entire life happening. But the thing is, if you blink, then you'll skip ahead in time, and it could be any length of time. It's never really clear about like how much time is jumped. I mean, that's the whole point of it, is like you're jumping between these random moments in a person's life, and it's that added layer of you are physically controlling time. Like if you blink, then you're going to skip ahead, and like you feel like you're with this person the whole way through. And then that is another thing. Like I very rarely cried in video games. That made me bawl my eyes out because that was such a sad ending. And it's another layer that I'm talking about, that it's just you feel like you're with these characters, like, especially with that added psychological effect of if you blink, like in the real world, then it affects your game. Because there's not a whole lot of things like that in video games where if you do something in the real world, then it'll actually affect the game. But this is one of them. It's another thing with like VR, where like you see like the people like falling down on the ground because you feel like you're actually in that world. Like it's this connectivity between fiction and nonfiction that makes it work so well. It makes it intertwine together, and your brain kind of for a second can forget about what's real life and what's not. One thing I will say is that another thing with why there's not really a lot of like masterfully written video games, and there's a lot, but if you compare video games to movies, granted, video games have not been around for as long as movies, so it's not really a fair comparison. But we can even compare with movies and books about how like a lot of the greatest writers to ever live have been both like they write books, and there's some others that write screenplays for movies. And with that case, you whenever you think of like the best writers to ever live, no, at least not even just to ever live, just the best writers of the past 20 years, not a lot of them are video game writers. And I think that that's another thing with like some of the best writers ever are writing movies and books. They're not writing video games. And that's why you don't really get a lot of these masterfully written video games. Now, before someone uses that out of context, I'm not saying that there's not a lot of great video game writers. There are a lot. But if you compare the video game writers to screenwriters, there's not a whole lot with video game writers, and that's just the fact that video games are a lot more weirder to write. Like it's really weird how they design it. Like if you've ever read the script to a video game, like that thing is like it's really thick, and it's a lot of like writing the story, the main story, and then there's other stuff with like side characters and everything that makes it a little bit harder to fully get all out. And so you don't see a lot of perfectly written video games as compared to movies or books. but there's still a lot of them that are out there that are still doing great jobs. It's just the quantity of good screenwriters and good writers compared to the quantity of good video game writers, it's not really that even. But to summarize everything, video games really are just their own unique storytelling, and you can do a lot of things that you can do with video games that you can't do with movies, and vice versa. And I love that. I love a variety of different stories that can all be told, and they all have their own strengths, their own weaknesses, but I really love all of them equally. I just think video games, when it's done right, they can have the greatest storytelling out of all forms of media. But I mean, if you enjoyed the video, like I said at the beginning, I mean, like and subscribe and share the video. Comment down below your own thoughts. I mean, do you agree with me, disagree with me? I mean, I'd love to hear everything you have to say. And that's really it. I mean, video games are unique with their own challenges and their own sets of circumstances that movies and books don't have. And that's perfectly all right. I just think that whenever you look at the pure potential that video games have, I think it's a little bit more than movies. But that's my own opinion, at least. That's what I think. I mean, like I said, I'd love to hear what you say. And that's really all to say. I know my name is Movie Talk, but I like to talk about all forms of media. But yeah, see ya.